Okay, Mary, I think we're ready to get started here.
Yeah.
I'm Ben Meyers, the Assistant Director for Communications and Marketing here at Albany Law School, and we have a very special presentation bringing this to all of our different people around the world that want to join us today for this display for the 19th Amendment, pop-up banner series. It's going around and things off to Prof. Lynch, who can help more, and of course, in our library.
All right, so I'm David Walker, Director of Schaefer Law Library at Albany Law School, and in the early of the fall, we started working on acquiring this 6-banner exhibit from the ABA and the Law Library of Congress commemorating the 19th Amendment's ratification. So this has been going on for a long time, and it came to us, it arrived on Friday, not at the most ideal time, but we have this exhibit for about 2 weeks, and although the law library is open to law students, we're not encouraging them to come in, they have the opportunity to come in, we figured as a way to provide a viewing option to the law school community that we would do display of the presentation. So organized by the ABA Standing Committee on the Law Library of Congress, this exhibit chronicles the history of women's suffrage movement, the legacy of the post-1920 efforts to expand voting rights, and the obstacles of disenfranchisement and voter suppression today. It is sponsored by the newly formed ABA Commission on the 19th Amendment to celebrate 100 years of women's constitutional right to vote, educate the public about the 19th Amendment, and battle for women's suffrage and promote laws that ensure women's full and equal exercise of their right to vote and to participate in our democracy. So the viewing of today is really, we're gonna, I and my colleague Leslie Cunningham, we're going to display banner by banner, and we'll read the contents because it would be a little difficult for you to see it from there. And then Professor Mary Lynch is going to give a little talk, and then we'll open up the floor for comments, questions, and the opportunity for the community just to chat, and we'll display the banner. So I have this laptop on a library cart, and we're able to move. So, so really the first banner is 100 years after the 19th Amendment, their legacy and our future. It lists the generous contributions of a number of sponsors who made this possible. And we will move now to the next banner. Now let me try to get, how is that? All right, so can every...
Make sure you're on speaker view because you'll get a better look at the banners if you're on speaker view on Zoom. Is that okay? Yeah, no, I know you are, but I think the participants, maybe you all know that, but just in case you're catching up with virtuality, you'll see the banners better.
That was valid. Thank you, Mary. I changed mine.
Go to speaker view. All right, so Seneca Falls launches a movement. It took a little more than a week for a small group of women in upstate New York to call a meeting that launched a mass movement that culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guaranteed the right of women to vote nationwide. In July 1848, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, two American abolitionists who met at the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention in London and were barred from the convention floor because they were women, along with Martha Coffin Wright, Mary Ann McClintock, and Jane Hunt, gathered at Stanton's home to chart a course to advance women's rights. Ultimately, they published an announcement in the Seneca County Courier calling a convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. On July 20th and 21st, more than 200 women and about 40 men convened at the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls for the convention, where Stanton read the Declaration of Sentiments and Grievances, a treatise modeled on the Declaration of Independence. Its preamble featured the proclamation, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights." The Declaration then detailed the injustices inflicted upon women in the United States and called upon women to organize and petition for their rights. During the convention, the Declaration of Sentiments and Grievances was adopted and signed. The Assembly also passed 12 resolutions, 11 unanimously, that called for equal rights of women. The 9th resolution, which declared it is the duty of the women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise, was the only one to meet opposition. After a lengthy debate, which included Frederick Douglass, the only African-American present, the resolution was passed, marking the beginning of the women's suffrage movement in America.
The road to ratification. Following the Seneca Falls Convention, a series of women's rights conventions were held during the 1850s before the Civil War sidelined the movement. Nevertheless, in 1866, the American Equal Rights Association formed out of these prior conventions to promote universal suffrage. It hired African American women to speak to audiences to convince them of the need for Black men and all women to have the right to vote. In 1869, divided over whether to support advances for African American men at the expense of all women, the AERA split, resulting in the formation of two groups, the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association. NWSA opposed the 15th Amendment, giving Black men the vote, unless women were included. AWSA, on the other hand, championed it. The first territorial legislature of the Wyoming Territory granted women suffrage in 1869. From the 1870s and into the early 1900s, suffragists organized, advocated, and even performed acts of civil disobedience to achieve suffrage. Individual states began extending voting rights to women living in the state. Colorado was the first to do so in 1893. As the movement grew, so did ideas about how best to achieve the goals. In 1913, Alice Paul formed what would become the National Women's Party, which relied on public demonstrations, parades, and picketing the White House to raise awareness of their cause. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted by Congress in 1919. From there, it had to be ratified by 36 out of the 48 states. Energized suffragists developed grassroots strategies for getting their message out to support adoption of the amendment at the upcoming referendum, while groups like the National Women's Party continued widespread demonstrations. Suffragists knocked on doors of their neighbors and distributed votes for women paraphernalia. Activists also participated in parades, wrote songs, and commissioned posters and political cartoons promoting suffrage to newspapers. 71 years after the Seneca Falls Convention, the 19th Amendment was ratified by a sufficient number of states to add the amendment to the US Constitution on August 18, 1920. Ratification was a significant milestone in the expansion of democracy in the history of the United States, but it did not eliminate all of the barriers to equality faced by African American women or other marginalized groups in American society.
The battle for women's equality has yet to be won. While many suffragists left public life after the enactment of the 19th Amendment in 1920, some like Alice Paul believe that the true battle for equal rights for women had yet to be won. Although the government recognized women's right to vote, many women and men still face discrimination. In 1922, while attending Washington College of Law at American University, she authored the text of what would become the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA. The ERA was introduced in every session of Congress from 1923 until it passed in both houses of Congress in 1972 and went to the states for ratification. Like the 19th Amendment before it, the ERA was quickly approved by 36 of the necessary 38 states needed for ratification. However, the ERA failed to reach the ratification before the set 1982 deadline. It has not yet been ratified to the Constitution, but continues to attract interest in contemporary discussions. Aside from efforts to amend the Constitution, activists for equal rights also pursued legislative reform. For example, the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which amended the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, prohibits gender-based wage discrimination in the United States. On June 13th, 2019, Alabama became the 49th state to sign the Equal Pay Act into law. Mississippi is the only state without a pay equity law. Women's groups have continued to fight for legal protection regarding fair pay. The 2008 Fair Pay Act allows workers who face discrimination to pursue remedies in federal court. Additional groups are pursuing the 2019 Equity Act, which would add gender and sexual orientation as a federal protected category under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In addition, the largely virtual Me Too movement has highlighted issues of sexual harassment and discrimination in American business and society.
Expanding democracy. The 19th Amendment was a remarkable expansion of democracy, but it still left behind many people in the United States who were denied citizenship rights, including the right to vote. As a result of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Chinese Americans were not granted citizenship and therefore could not vote until the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed by the Magnuson Act of 1943. Chinese immigration later increased with the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which abolished direct racial barriers, and later by the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which abolished the national origins formula. Similarly, many Native Americans did not have legal citizenship until 1924 with the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act. But this did not extend to securing the vote. Borrowing from the tactics of the suffragists, Native Americans won the right to vote by fighting for it state by state, with New Mexico becoming the last state to guarantee voting rights for Native Americans in 1962. African Americans faced Jim Crow era suppression from Reconstruction into the 1960s. The century-long civil rights movement resulted in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited employers from discriminating against an individual based not only on their race, color, religion, or national origin, but also sex. Nevertheless, African Americans still experience voter suppression. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed to abolish legal barriers that prevented African Americans from voting. Since 1970, Congress has enacted major amendments to the act. In 2013, the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County v. Holder overturned important sections of the VRA that required that states with a history of racial bias in voting get permission before passing new voting laws. The Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act of 1984 was signed into law, advancing the fundamental right to vote by improving access for handicapped and elderly individuals to registration facilities and polling. In 1990, Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, requiring that polling centers have accommodations for Americans with disabilities.
A new century after ratification, a new wave of suffragists. The 19th Amendment had a lasting legacy at the intersection of equal rights for women and voting rights for all. At the centennial of the amendment's ratification, important aspects of women's rights and voting rights remain controversial, requiring that a balance be found. Recent federal, state, and local legislatures have enacted numerous reforms to expand access to the ballot, including early voting. Critics of these measures argue that they open the door to electoral fraud, which has led to the adoption of laws intended to prevent fraud, including identification provisions. In 2006, Indiana became the first of 35 states to enact a government-issued voter identification law, which the United States Supreme Court upheld in 2008. Critics of these laws argue that they reintroduced barriers to voting that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 aimed to eliminate, especially for low-income Americans and people experiencing homelessness who might have government-issued identification documents. The formerly incarcerated also experienced voter disenfranchisement. 20 other states ban felons from voting for life. There is a movement towards re-enfranchisement. In January 2019, voting rights were returned to most of the formerly incarcerated persons in Florida who have completed the terms of their sentence. In recent years, organizing efforts by women has fostered a new wave of women's rights activity. In January 2017, millions of activists worldwide participated in the Women's March, one of the largest peaceful demonstrations in history demanding civil and voting rights equality to those who are disenfranchised. Like the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, the Women's March was a grassroots movement that emerged out of a single clarion call to action. A century after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, voter disenfranchisement continues, spurring lawyers, bar associations, judges, and other legal professionals to lead the nation in pursuing justice and defending liberty. So that is it for the banners. I will display them again in, where are they? From here, and we will here have the opportunity to listen to Professor Mary Lynch move us with her always inspiring words. Mary?
Oh, Lord. Wow, you set that up. All right, I have to put this in gallery view so I'm not looking at myself as the speaker. Oh, no, I see. That's in that view. Okay, let me. So first of all, I just want to say, can everyone hear me? Is this a good volume? David? Okay. Thank you. I am so happy to be with all of you today virtually to honor Women's History Month and the anniversary of suffrage. I think we're so fortunate to be able to enjoy this together virtually. This amazing exhibit didn't just come easily. It was arranged, installed, and carefully organized by and curated by our amazing librarians. And so I just want to do a sort of virtual applause by, you know, clicking in the air, hitting your likes, chatting on the side to say thank you. but we just have the most amazing librarians at Albany Law, and I am grateful for them, particularly every day, but particularly today. All right, so I have a message first from Professor Melissa Brieger, chair of the Kate Stoneman Committee, who wants me to reassure you that we have only postponed Stoneman Day. We have not canceled it. We're looking forward to celebrating together in the fall on our campus in our usual Albany Law community way, with as many alums and community members attending. If in the meantime you are really jonesing for some Stoneman action, you can check out From Kate Stoneman to Kathy Katz, an article co-authored by Professor Brieger and myself at 77 Albany Law Review 2014. And that talks about Stoneman and then leads up to our wonderful Kathy Katz, the first Stoneman chair here at Albany Law School. So I'm so excited to talk about my favorite thing. The life story of our own, and I'm wearing my Albany Law pin, Kate Stoneman, class of 1898, is very much intertwined with the late 19th century and earliest 20th American suffrage movement. There were, as far back as 1700s, there were voices and women and people clamoring for suffrage, but it is the late 18th and early 19th century movement that we are most familiar with. By the end of these few minutes, if you are not already a Kate zealot, I hope you will become obsessed with her. She will become your Shiro, as she is for many of us already at Albany Law. You don't have to name your children or your pets after Kate. But then again, not a bad idea. I'm also going to shout out right here to students and others who may want to, maybe Women's Law Caucus or SBA, organize a Kate Stoneman trivia night or Jeopardy night. I would be happy to participate. But let's get down to her life story. Her timeline of her life and her geographical location between Western New York and here in the fabulous state capital of Albany really put her smack in the middle of the most important suffrage events. And she took those opportunities with relish and she ran with them. Kate was born in 1848 in Western New York, Chautauqua County, in a little town called Worcester. And she was born into what she described later as a very liberal-minded family because they supported her desire to pursue education. Her early years coincided with the crystallization of the late 19th century suffrage movement. So imagine, she was 7 years old when in 1948 in Seneca Falls, as you just heard, the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments was signed at the first convention organized by women. So Seneca Falls is also Western New York. New York is where the Erie Canal sort of pieces of it is where the action was happening, both on abolition and on suffrage. And so as a little girl who's in this liberal-minded family and is thinking about her identity, how exciting. And she was in a family in which information and outside activities of the world were seemed to be very much discussed because her siblings went on to hold offices in other states in this country. So there she is at 7. And little did she know that one day she would be inducted into Seneca Falls National Women's Museum in Seneca Falls, and due to Albany Law School nominating her, she has been inducted, and she is one of the national honorees. But back to 1848. So she's 7 years old, she's growing up, she knows she wants to pursue education, but when it came to time to pursue it, I think she made the very good choice of pursuing education in the state capital, Albany, New York. She applied to a teacher's college. They used to be called normal schools back then, and what is now SUNY Albany. And she was accepted there in 1884. Now remember, 1884 is right in the middle of the Civil War. So she was traveling between Albany, off to Western New York, Chautauqua County, on what she later recalls as very long trips and very perilous roads. But she was undaunted. So during these Civil War times and these long trips and these perilous roads, she pursues it. And in 1866, she graduates from what we now know as SUNY Albany, and she went on to teach, including at the school that educated her. She rose to be an assistant vice principal. She was the first female president of the Alumni Association. And it was during that time when she was teaching that she became involved in the suffrage movement. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for those of us who are lawyers. Kate's college, or at the time not a university perhaps, never seemed to get around to promoting her to the title of professor. Perhaps in part, the discrimination she experienced professionally motivated her to seek other ways to achieve. And boy, oh boy, are we glad she did. The story of how she successfully overturned the misogynist law barring women from admission to the bar is a story that's worth repeatedly telling. I think the best telling of this historical moment comes from the writings of our beloved Albany Law School professor, Kathy Katz, and I highly recommend her chapter on Kate Stoneman, contained in the very readable and affordable Pioneering Women Lawyers from Kate Stoneman to the Present. It's a collection, has an intro by Kathy and others. It was edited by our beloved alum and former professor and dean, Patty Salkin. And it also contains the first dozen keynoters that we had at Kate Stoneman celebrations. And it can be obtained through the ABA. I think it's the Commission on Women in the Profession. So if those of you are wondering what to do when you're socially distancing, this is a delightful page turner in my mind. So from here, I'm going to read a little bit about in Kathy's own words, because Kathy has a peculiar sense of humor, or peculiarly witty sense of humor. And she also was just one of the most amazing writers on our faculty. There was not one female lawyer in New York at the time Kate applied for admission to the bar in 1886. And there were very few in the rest of the country. As Kate herself later remarked, the only occupations then open to women were housekeeping, sewing, cooking, tailoring, domestic nursing, teaching in, quote, dame schools, and shop work. Those of you who have been my students know that I would be unemployed back then. The only other woman to have taken the New York bar had unfortunately failed. Not our Kate. Kate passed both the written and oral part in 1886, but was summarily denied admission into the bar solely because she was a woman. The three judges of the New York State Supreme Court, who at the time was the court that held the power to regulate and admit attorneys to the practice of law, stated, I'm going to pretend I'm speaking from back then, no precedent, no English precedent, no necessity. And the state, which was called the Code of Civil Procedure back then, required that an applicant for admission to practice be male. So, undeterred, back to Kathy's language, Professor Katz, undeterred, Kate and her suffragist supporters began lobbying efforts to change the law. Within a day, all right, big pause here. Okay, within one day, this woman was amazing. She was effective. She was efficient. She was able to rally and do this in one day. All right, she's still my shero. Okay, back to Kathy Katz. Within a day, she had found almost unanimous support in both houses of the legislature for an amendment stating that neither race nor sex could be an impediment to bar admission. That same day, Kate visited Governor David B. Hell and Secretary of State Homer A. Nelson, who signed the bill. All right, the same day. She's like, I got the legislature, now I got the governor. Come sign my bill. So she then took the signed bill, I just love this part, it makes me giggle, I'm sorry, to the Supreme Court and was duly admitted to practice by the same 3 judges who had earlier denied her application. Thus, Kate became the first female member of the bar in New York and one of the few women admitted to practice law in the United States. Okay, you have to be a Kate zealot by now, but if not, there's more. I do want to say that as Kathy notes very wittily, and you should read the whole chapter in the Pioneering Women Lawyers book, but Kathy goes on to wittily note, Kate's admission to the bar was not unanimously praised. An article in the Daily Register, the predecessor to the New York Law Journal, compared the yearly changes in women's fashion to the practice of law by women. It mockingly suggested that every year, all legal documents would be changed to meet the latest fashions. The Albany Law Journal congratulated Kate on her admission to the bar, but humbly advised her to, quote, have as few women clients as possible, since women clients are troublesome. Oh, you haven't even seen trouble. Okay, sorry, that was my aside. It should be noted that while much has been made of the fact that Kate opened the door for women to practice law in New York, there is almost no mention at the time of her equaling important success in making certain that there was no racial barrier to admission to the bar. Many of us who've looked at this have speculated was because she had come out of sort of the abolitionist suffrage movement. Hello? Was that why she did that? Was it a strategic getting together allies by making it both race and gender or sex? Was it a, or maybe it was that at the time there, although by law there should not have been a preclusion based on race, you know, were there court clerks or others that were refusing to follow the law the way we saw that with the initial clerk response on gay marriage. So some of that is lost to history, and as you well can imagine, even though Kate is such an impressive person of her time, their documentarians and historians didn't really take her seriously. So we are working with the help of our library, we have gotten as much, and the SUNY Albany Library, as much information as we can on her. So that's all interesting. She goes to the bar, she's now admitted, and you may ask, well, she's already admitted to the bar. When did she go to Albany Law School? She'd already passed the bar. Why did she need to go to law school? Well, those of you who are in our graduate programs know that there is advanced study of law and that there's always a reason to study more in law. But let me tell you a little bit about what was happening back then. Aspiring lawyers read law, and they worked in lawyers' offices to pass the bar. For more advanced or higher studies, a wannabe lawyer or a lawyer in practice who wanted to advance studies attended law school. In New York, women before Kate had been denied by other law schools admission to the law school. For example, one of my favorites is the Dean of Columbia claimed he was saving women from the degradation of practicing law. Please don't save me, and you're definitely not going to save Kate. Kate applied to Albany Law in 1896. Worked part-time while she attended, like many of our students who were so hardworking while they're going to law school, and she received her degree in 1898. Kate was listed as practicing law in an office at 136 State Street in Albany, and from her home on 135 South Swan Street. We may want to do a socially distanced walking tour at some point. Kate's primary reason for pursuing admission to the bar was for the precedent is established and the new sphere of life it opened for women. Okay, Kate's activism on women's issues as suffragists and on the temperance and peace movement, and those of you in my domestic violence seminar know that the temperance movement was intertwined with an anti-women abuse movement. So don't just think that Kate, didn't like to have a drink. It was a different strategies around fighting abuse at the time. But Kate did not just, when her personal pursuit ended with being admitted to the bar and attending Albany Law School, she was still working. Like, this woman was amazing. Finally, in 1917, the New York State Constitution granted women the right to vote. And sure enough, in 1980, we find Kate serving as a poll watcher in the first election in which women voted in New York. At the age of 79, just 5 years before her death, Kate witnessed the narrow ratification of the 19th Amendment and its passage into law. Aren't we glad for her and for us that, unlike other brave and brilliant suffragists who didn't get this chance, Kate's story ends on a happy note. She lived to witness ratification, to see her country do what she always knew was just and right, and to exercise her right to vote. I think Kate would be so very pleased to know that we are hosting this 19th Amendment exhibit that we take seriously and we celebrate continuously the role that she and suffragettes had in making our laws more just and our country more equal. I also believe that Kate knew the fight for fairness and equality is never over. The eminent civil rights activist, pathbreaker on both gender and race, Judge Constance Baker Motley, who was the first woman of color to become a federal judge in the United States, was our 1997 Kate Stoneman Day keynote speaker. I remember her ending her speech with just these ringing words that I've kept close to my heart and to my work, to my thoughts, and I wanted to repeat them for you here today. Judge Motley said, "All one has to do is take a course in women's history to discover that the struggle for women's equality is centuries old, and to realize that the price of women's equality is eternal vigilance." Thank you for spending this time with me, and I'm going to hand it back to David.
Thanks, Mary. So what I'll do is take pictures of the banners and I'll post them on the Schaefer Law Library Facebook page so everybody can view it at their leisure. But now we'll just open it up for questions or comments if anybody has any. I can't hear.
So we do have a question from the Office of Alumni Engagement. They're asking, Mary, can we see your socks?
Yes, I have to tell you, I have Ruth Bader Ginsburg socks, but it's hard to lift my feet over my head while I'm doing that. But if you hold on 1 second, I can do that. Hold on.
I'm sure this is what everybody came to the big exhibit for. Like, this is the main attraction.
Where are my socks? Oh my God, I had them right here. Okay, you know what? That'll be the next time I'll show my feet, okay? But yes, Ruth Bader Ginsburg socks are definitely something that one must wear when you are doing one of these. Are there any students on the line currently that want to say something about their experience of ever having been to a Kate Stoneman Day? Because particularly first years didn't get to do that. And I'd love to hear from any of our students or who want to comment on this at all, because we miss you. The faculty really miss you.
We do have Trina in the chat who has raised her hand.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, so we can see you too.
Oh, you can? Oh my God, fucking crazy. Hi, everybody. So,
Oh.
And we lost you. Oh, there you go. Wait a minute. No, you got to hit your unmute, Trina.
I hit it. You hear me?
All right. Yeah, now we hear you. Yeah.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Hi there.
I'm good. How's everybody?
We're doing, you know what? We're doing okay, but I have to tell you, the faculty and administration, we just miss you. So anytime we do this, come on with us virtually, because you're what gives us the energy. You're what gives us the passion. So, I mean, just seeing your face makes me feel good.
Good. I was hesitant, because of how I look right now. But, sorry. But yeah, I mean, overall, based off my Kate Stoneman experience, being a part of the committees and, actually seeing the ceremony comes into play, it's really enjoyable. It kind of, kind of like lights the fuel to your fire, you know what I mean? As like a woman, that wants to enter this profession, that, you can do what you want to do.
And you've certainly proved that. I mean, you've been working in internships, you've been doing, I mean, I have to sometimes say to you, say no once in a while, but you definitely have, you're following in Kate's footsteps.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
Well, I do want to, if you don't mind, I do want to just say one thing that I didn't say before, but Kate had a message for young people. And near the end of her life in 1925, and I'll read it here. I am happy for the opportunity that I have had. Time, place, and circumstances combined to help me accomplish my work. Up to my time, there were many who tried to win and were unsuccessful because other people had, other women had tried to get admission to the bar, but Kate was very strategic to do it legislatively. Later, there were others who accomplished greater things. My message is to younger women. They must take their opportunities as they come. Always, there are opportunities to be had. Catherine Stoneman, 1925. So that's her message that I think is to our students continuing today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm curious, is there any other students in the chat?
Going through the list here, it does look like there are a couple other students, and a bunch of members of staff and faculty as well. It looks like Jessica Haller just jumped into the chat window itself, which, just to reiterate to everybody, whichever is easier for you. If being on the voice side's easier, by all means, hit your space bar and it will unmute you and you can jump into the conversation that way. Or if typing on the keyboard's easier, we're keeping an eye on that as well. So we can relay that to everybody that's listening.
And you don't have to put the video on. I mean,
no, correct.
We don't have to out the fact that it's more efficient to do our work in our pajamas these days. We don't have to out that. Are there any alums that want to comment or ask questions? Because I see from Jeff Shantz that there are a few alumni as well, and we really thank you for joining us. And then finally, any faculty or staff, before we sign off, comment, question, good recipe to work on while we're socially distancing.
So, and we also have our Jeopardy question of the day answered by Professor Clark. Other than Dolly Parton, there aren't many chances to give a call out to my home state, Tennessee, but it was the final one to ratify the 19th Amendment. So there you go. So in case that's on Final Jeopardy tonight, you've heard it here first. Always educating here at Albany Law School.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating. Stay safe, use the precautions, and I'll put the pictures of the banners up later today. Thanks.
Yep, and also anybody who wants to watch the video of this, that will be available also on social media coming up later today once we get all the things figured out to get that up. So keep an eye out for that as well.